January 6th. A. The defendant insinuated that more than 10,000 dead voters had voted in Georgia. Just 4 days earlier, Georgia's Secretary of State had explained to the defendant that this was false. B. The defendant asserted that there had been 205,000 more votes than voters in Pennsylvania. The defendant's acting attorney general and acting deputy attorney general had explained to him that this was false. C. The defendant said that there had been a suspicious vote dump in Detroit, Michigan. The defendant's attorney general had explained to the defendant that this was false, and the defendant's allies in the Michigan State Legislature, the Speaker of the House of Representatives and Majority Leader of the Senate, had publicly announced that there was no evidence of substantial fraud in the state. D. The defendant claimed that there had been tens of thousands of double votes and other fraud in Nevada. The Nevada Secretary of State had previously rebutted the defendant's fraud claims by publicly posting a facts versus myths document explaining that Nevada judges had reviewed and rejected them, and the Nevada Supreme Court had rendered a decision denying such claims. The defendant said that more than 30,000 non-citizens had voted in Arizona. The defendant's own campaign manager had explained to him that such claims were false, and the Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives, who had supported the defendant in the election, had issued a public statement that there was no evidence of substantial fraud in Arizona. F. The defendant asserted that voting machines in various contested states had switched votes from the defendant to Biden. The defendant's attorney general, acting attorney general, and acting deputy attorney general all had explained to him that this was false, and numerous recounts and audits had confirmed the accuracy of voting machines. This is Facepalm America. I'm Beowulf Rockland. We will continue reading the full indictment against Donald J. Trump in the January 6th case after this. Facepalm America, I'm Beowulf Rockland, facepalmamerica.com. Let's continue reading the January 6th indictment against Donald J. Trump. The criminal agreement and acts to effect the object of the conspiracy. The defendant's use of deceit to get state officials to subvert the legitimate election results and change electoral votes. Shortly after Election Day, which fell on November 3rd, 2020, the defendant launched his criminal scheme. On November 13th, the defendant's campaign attorneys conceded in court that he had lost the vote count in the state of Arizona, meaning, based on the assessment the defendant's campaign advisors had given him just a week earlier, the defendant had lost the election. So the next day, the defendant turned to co-conspirator 1, whom he announced would spearhead his efforts going forward to challenge the election results. From that point on, the defendant and his co-conspirators executed a strategy to use knowing deceit in the targeted states to impair, obstruct, and defeat the federal government function, including as described below. Arizona. On November 13th, 2020, the defendant had a conversation with his campaign manager, who informed him that a claim had been circulating that a substantial number of non-citizens had voted in Arizona was false. On November 22nd, 8 days before the Arizona governor's certified ascertainment of the state's legitimate electors based on the popular vote, the defendant and co-conspirator 1 called the Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives and made knowingly false claims of election fraud, aimed at interfering with the ascertainment of and voting by Arizona's electors as follows. A. The defendant and co-conspirator 1 falsely asserted, among other things, that a substantial number of non-citizens, non-residents, and dead people had voted fraudulently in Arizona. The Arizona House Speaker, asked co-conspirator 1 for evidence of the claims, which co-conspirator 1 did not have, but claimed he would provide. Co-conspirator 1 never did so. B. The defendant and co-conspirator 1 asked the Arizona House Speaker to call the legislature into session to hold a hearing based on their claims of election fraud. The Arizona House Speaker refused, stating that doing so would require a 2/3 vote of its members, and he would not allow it without actual evidence of fraud. C. The defendant and co-conspirator 1 asked the Arizona House Speaker to use the legislature to circumvent the process by which legitimate electors would be ascertained for Biden based on the popular vote, and replace those electors with a new slate for the defendant. The Arizona House Speaker refused, responding that the suggestion was beyond anything he had ever heard or thought of as something within his authority. On December 1st, co-conspirator 1 met with the Arizona House Speaker. When the Arizona House Speaker again asked co-conspirator 1 for evidence of the outcome determinative election fraud he and the defendant had been claiming, co-conspirator 1 responded with words to the effect of, "We don't have the evidence, but we have lots of theories." On December 4th, the Arizona House Speaker issued a public statement that said, in part, "No election is perfect, and if there were evidence of illegal votes or an improper count, then Arizona law provides a process to contest the election, a lawsuit under state law. But the law does not authorize the legislature to reverse the results of an election. As a conservative Republican, I don't like the results of the presidential election. I voted for President Trump and worked hard to re-elect him, but I cannot and will not entertain a suggestion that we violate current law to change the outcome of a certified election. I and my fellow legislators swore an oath to support the U.S. Constitution and the Constitution and laws of the state of Arizona. It would violate that oath and the basic principles of Republican government and the rule of law if we attempted to nullify the people's vote based on unsupported theories of fraud. Under the laws that we wrote and voted upon, Arizona voters choose who wins, and our system requires that their choice be respected." On the morning of January 4th, 2021, co-conspirator 2 called the Arizona House Speaker to urge him to use a majority of the legislature to decertify the state's legitimate electors. Arizona's validly ascertained electors had voted 3 weeks earlier and sent their votes to Congress, which was scheduled to count these votes in Biden's favor in just 2 days' time at the January 6th certification proceeding. When the Arizona House Speaker explained that state investigations had uncovered no evidence of substantial fraud in the state, co-conspirator 2 conceded that he didn't know enough about the facts on the ground in Arizona, but nonetheless told the Arizona House Speaker to decertify and let the courts sort it out. The Arizona House Speaker refused, stating that he would not play with the oath he had taken to uphold the United States Constitution and Arizona law. On January 6th, the defendant publicly repeated the knowingly false claim that 36,000 non-citizens had voted in Arizona. Georgia. On November 16, 2020, on the defendant's behalf, his executive assistant sent co-conspirator 3 and others a document containing bullet points critical of a certain voting machine company, writing, "See attached. Please include as is or almost as is in lawsuit." Co-conspirator 3 responded 9 minutes later, writing, "It must go in all suits in Georgia and Pennsylvania immediately with a fraud claim that requires the entire election to be set aside. In those states, and machines impounded for nonpartisan professional inspection." On November 25th, co-conspirator 3 filed a lawsuit against the governor of Georgia, falsely alleging massive election fraud accomplished through the voting machine company's election software and hardware. Before the lawsuit was even filed, the defendant retweeted a post promoting it. The defendant did this despite the fact that when he had discussed co-conspirator three's far-fetched public claims regarding the voting machine company in private with advisors, the defendant had conceded that they were unsupported and that co-conspirator 3 sounded crazy. Co-conspirator 3's Georgia lawsuit was dismissed on December 7th. On December 3rd, co-conspirator 1 orchestrated a presentation to a judiciary subcommittee of the Georgia State Senate with the intention of misleading state senators into blocking the ascertainment of legitimate electors. During the presentation, an agent of the defendant and co-conspirator 1 falsely claimed that more than 10,000 dead people voted in Georgia. That afternoon, a senior advisor to the defendant told the defendant's chief of staff through text messages, "Just an FYI, a campaign lawyer and his team verified that the 10K plus supposed dead people voting in Georgia is not accurate. It was alleged in co-conspirator 1's hearing today." The senior advisor clarified that he believed the actual number was 12. B. Another agent of the defendant and co-conspirator 1 played a misleading excerpt of a video recording of ballot counting at State Farm Arena in Atlanta and insinuated that it showed election workers counting suitcases of illegal ballots. C. Co-conspirator 2 encouraged the legislators to decertify the state's legitimate electors based on false allegations of election fraud. Also on December 3rd, the defendant issued a tweet amplifying the knowingly false claims made in co-conspirator 1's presentation in Georgia. Wow, blockbuster testimony taking place right now in Georgia. Ballot stuffing by Dems when Republicans were forced to leave the large counting room. Plenty more coming, but this alone leads to an easy win of the state. On December 4th, the Georgia Secretary of State's chief operating officer debunked the claims made at co-conspirator 1's presentation the previous day, issuing a tweet stating, "The 90-second video of election workers at State Farm Arena purporting to show fraud was watched in its entirety, hours, by at Georgia Sec of State investigators. Shows normal ballot processing. Here is the fact check on it." On December 7th, he reiterated during a press conference that the claim that there had been misconduct at State Farm Arena was false. On December 8th, the defendant called the Georgia Attorney General to pressure him to support an election lawsuit filed in the Supreme Court by another state's Attorney General. The Georgia Attorney General told the defendant that officials had investigated various claims of election fraud in the state and were not seeing evidence to support them. Also on December 8th, a senior campaign advisor who spoke with the defendant on a daily basis and had informed him on multiple occasions that various fraud claims were untrue, expressed frustration that many of co-conspirator 1 and his legal team's claims could not be substantiated. As early as mid-November, for instance, the senior campaign advisor had informed the defendant that his claims of a large number of dead voters in Georgia were untrue. With respect to the persistent false claim regarding State Farm Arena, on December 8th, the senior campaign advisor wrote in an email, "When our research and campaign legal team can't back up any of the claims made by our elite strike force legal team, you can see why we're 0 to 32 on our cases. Obviously, I'll hustle to help on all fronts, but it's tough to own any of this when it's all just conspiracy shit beamed down from the mothership." On December 10th, 4 days before Biden's validly ascertained electors were scheduled to cast votes and send them to Congress, co-conspirator 1 appeared at a hearing before the Georgia House of Representatives Government Affairs Committee. Co-conspirator 1 played the state